guys, a few weeks ago I did a video on my channel about working abroad, and I talked a lot about my experiences as an American who now works in France. There's a siren, there's proof. I live in France. Basically, I just talked about my experience, some tips and advice for working abroad and all of that. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I will link it up in a card and I will also link it in the description box below and you can go and check that out. But in that video, I mentioned this other idea and a lot of you guys did say you really wanted to see it. So that is what I'm doing today. I work at a media company in Paris, and in our office, which is a fairly small office because it's a startup company, so there aren't too many employees in the total company, but we have 6 different language teams and 5 of those are actually in the same office. So the 5 languages that are sort of represented in our company are French, English, Spanish, Italian, and German. And then we also have a Portuguese team that works remotely. So on a daily basis, I am in a room filled with at least 5 different languages every single day. I'm on the English team, obviously, and all of us on our team are native English speakers, and that's kind of how it works with each team in this company. It's such a different environment from what I ever imagined being possible for me to work in. Never in my life have I worked in a place like this, and I'm not really sure how many places like this exist, to be honest. Even for international companies, even for fairly small companies that represent tons of different languages, it's still, I feel like, a pretty unique type of setup. So as someone who is really fascinated by languages and who knows 3 so far, but I would love to learn more in the future, obviously. I've said that in multiple videos, I think, so far. It's a really cool place to be, and it's a really cool place especially to find myself as my first job in Paris, in this new country where I didn't quite speak French well enough when I first got here to feel completely comfortable around an entire environment of native French speakers. It would have been really, really intimidating for my very first introduction to, you know, living in Paris. Obviously, with this type of environment, it's first of all different from a lot of work environments because up until now, I pretty much worked either in monolingual environments or bilingual environments, but it was pretty much one language or maybe 2 languages that I had to deal with on a daily basis. Being in a room with 5 different languages and working with people who speak 6 different languages basically natively definitely adds some really cool pros and some really challenging cons. So I kind of want to talk about those things today. I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between pros and cons, but I'll admit to you right now I have more pros than I do cons. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that. Personally, one of my pros is that when I first came here, I wasn't fluent in French yet, and I struggled a bit, and the idea of working 24/7 in French was just, it was too much for me a year ago. I really love that I can work in English, I can use my specialty in English, but I also get to use French at work. Each different team works in their native language, so our main job is using our native language expertise, and then any meetings with our bosses or any even interactions with colleagues are all in French basically. So it's been a really great way to build up my French level, to work from where I started, which was a little bit not very confident, and work it up to something where now I actually can communicate with people. A con that kind of comes along with this though is that it can actually be really confusing for your brain to have that many different languages. Sometimes I start typing an email and I realize this is to an English-speaking colleague, why am I trying to write this in French? Sometimes, of course, the opposite happens. Even more than that, there are little things like when you're walking down the hall and you see a colleague, sometimes your brain can't figure out like if you're supposed to say hello or bonjour, or even sometimes hola, because sometimes I say hola to my Spanish-speaking colleagues, and sometimes your brain just does this weird little thing like, crap, which language was I supposed to speak? I have accidentally spoken English to someone who maybe doesn't speak English. I have done the opposite. I've spoken French to an English-speaking colleague, which is not the end of the world. It's just not normally natural for us since we work all day in English together. So it's a little bit of a brain tease sometimes, and sometimes it's kind of hard to get your brain to cooperate. And sometimes when I'm like writing an article all in English, I'm very focused on my English brain. If my boss walks over and starts talking to me in French, I have to immediately switch and get in my French brain like really fast, which is challenging when you are just in your English brain. Now to balance this out with another pro, of course, the conversations can be really fun. Because you're working around so many different people with so many different backgrounds, the type of stuff that you just get into conversations about at lunchtime, for example, can be so interesting. You have a ton of different perspectives on the world, you have a ton of different things you can learn. If you ever wanted to know about, I don't know, like the German elections, I can just talk to my German colleagues at work and get some actual insight into those elections rather than just reading English materials online. A con that can sometimes happen at lunchtime though, specifically, is that that sometimes the click thing can happen. If you happen to go and sit down at the lunch table and all of your Italian speaking colleagues are there, or all of your German speaking colleagues are there, or only your Spanish speaking colleagues are there, it's possible that they'll be talking about something from their team or something that's going on at work, or they'll just have, naturally segued into their native language. And sometimes, if you're not really paying attention, even if you don't intend to leave somebody out, you can. I am really lucky that all of my colleagues are extremely nice people. Nobody would intentionally, be cliquey or leave people out, but it just naturally happens when you're working with so many people in so many different languages. Sometimes you're not always aware of what's going on or even what language you're speaking. At the same time, even though accidental clicks can happen, nobody ever really feels like an outsider there. Some of my colleagues have lived in Paris for years, some of them are newer than I am, but ultimately the majority of people there, except for the French team obviously, but the majority of people still understand what it's like to not be in your home country. So it's a little bit similar to the kind of effect that happens when you study abroad, for example. If any of you guys have studied abroad, you can very easily form these bonds with international students, and you don't really have that much in common except the fact that you are international. That makes it easier too to make French mistakes. So as I've learned French and as I progressed in French, there's a lot less pressure because I am in such an international environment, and most of the people around me have faced that French learning process, and even the French native speakers often will speak a different language again because it's a very international company. So everybody understands, basically. If you make a French mistake, everybody understands where you're coming from. Everyone feels your pain. You can bond over the fact that the French language is so confusing. A con related to this one, but it's actually a little bit of a silly con to put on this list, I'm still gonna do it though, because it is a reality, is that sometimes you can pick up some bad French habits from this. Part of the reason it seems kind of silly to put this as a con is because, well, first of all, a lot of my colleagues are like perfectly fluent and really, really good at French, so probably I'm the one who will be teaching them more bad habits than them teaching me bad habits. But it also seems silly because I'm not really sure how much merit there is to like reinforcing bad French habits. You're gonna make mistakes, but I'm obviously around enough native French speakers with, my husband and his family and my friends who are native French speakers as well, so I'm not really sure how much it does reinforce bad French habits, but it's a possibility. And depending on what type of multilingual environment you might be looking at jumping into or you might be a part of, it could potentially come into play. When a lot of the people you're speaking to are not also French speakers, then some of the slang that they might use or some of the phrases they might use may not necessarily be reflective of what is commonly spoken, but still it seems like a silly con to be pointing out just because I'm not really sure how much merit there is. But I kind of felt like I had to put it on this list because yes, it could actually have some merit in a multilingual environment, and also I have like no other cons to put on this list. Basically, overall, there are definitely, in my opinion, more pros than there are cons to working in a multilingual environment if you're someone who loves languages as much as I do, obviously. It's a really cool environment. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I really like working in a place that is so different from every other place that I've ever worked and every place I kind of imagined working. I've always wanted to work in an international company, but just getting to work so closely with so many people of different backgrounds is really cool. So I hope you guys found this interesting, hearing about my experiences in this type of environment. Let me know in the comments if you work in a multilingual environment, or if you studied abroad and have had sort of similar experiences like this, or if it's something that interests you in the future. Thank you guys all so much for watching as always, and I will see you soon.